If you've ever taken a walk in downtown Sacramento after watching a basketball game or going to a concert or maybe just grabbing a bite to eat at a restaurant, a lot of what you see, you can draw a direct line to the earliest civilizations that we know of. From the banks of the Sacramento River to many buildings that you encounter on your walk, to the sculptures that dot the city and Capitol Park. All of these have their origins in early civilizations found in Mesopotamia. Now, these early civilizations began in a place called Mesopotamia, or also known as the Fertile Crescent Valley, which exists in modern day Iraq. And the reason these civilizations begin here and not anywhere else is precisely because of its name, the Fertile Crescent Valley. That fertile land, right, on the banks of the two rivers of the Tigris and Euphrates, made it possible for these civilizations to grow from these tribes to little towns to actual city states with a lot of power and potential. Now, the first civilization to arise from the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers are known as the Sumerians, and we're going to focus primarily on their architecture. Now, if you remember, the last time we spoke about architecture was in the prehistoric period, where we took a look at two particular architectural features: corbelline, with a corbelled arch, and post and lintel. And obviously those were used primarily to protect themselves from the elements, right? To give literally a roof over their head. What we're going to see the Sumerians do is begin to use architecture as a symbol of power. The work that we're going to be focusing on is a work called the ziggurat. And this one specifically is referred to as the Nana ziggurat. Now, first of all, in this first image, I use this image because it gives you a sense of scale. You see that car there, and then you see the building, the ziggurat, arise from behind it. That should give you an idea of how large this is. Now imagine you were back in, 2000 BCE when this was created, and you're slowly approaching this Sumerian city, and off in the distance you see what looks like a hill, but as you get closer and closer, you indeed find out that is not a hill, but the large building we know as the ziggurat. And you're automatically struck with the power. The power that these people, the Sumerians, are able to organize themselves and build something that rivals Mother Nature, right? This is like a mountain, a hill. So this is what the Sumerians are trying to do. They're trying to evoke the power and strength that they have to anybody who comes to visit. And now this in particular building, the ziggurat, is not a fortress, it's not a palace, it's actually a religious building. And if you were to climb those stairs and up to the top, you would encounter an altar there. Now, not just anybody would be allowed to go up there. It was primarily preserved for high priests. And so this idea of moving upwards into the heavens transforms these high priests or elevates them to somebody or a group of people that are more special than the average person. And once they were up on that ziggurat, they would be able to look down on the rest of the Sumerians. Now, there's a direct connection between this work of architecture, the ziggurat, and the sculptures that the Sumerians make. Now, we're looking at a picture of what we refer to as votive sculptures. And if you can see, their hands are clasped together. And we find hundreds, if not thousands, of these works of art. And what we see is that they're, with their hands clasped, they're slowly tilting their head upwards. And so what we think are that these small votive sculptures are the average Sumerian, and they were buried either to commemorate the death of a Sumerian or a kind of prayer sculpture, so that if you had a prayer, you would bury it. And much like looking up to the top of the ziggurat where the high priest and the altar was the most sacred of places, that these sculptures are frozen in the act of looking up. So it's an interesting connection between sculpture and architecture that we find in early Sumerian work. Now, the next Sumerian work of art that we're going to be looking at is called the Uruk vase. And we're primarily looking at this work of art for two reasons. One is to learn the word registers. Now, what are registers? They're essentially scenes. This vase here on the outside has these images, these sculpted images. And you can see there's kind of a space up top, there's a middle one, and then below there's yet another strip where these images exist. Well, those strips where these images exist are referred to as registers. And what are registers? You are probably most familiar with them in a comic strip. If you've ever gotten a piece of gum that has these comic images with them, or just look at a standard comic book, the way that that's laid out, the narrative as it moves from top to bottom, is called a register. Each one of those comic scenes is indeed a register. Now, the next term we're interested with here is that on the very top of these three scenes on the Uruk vase, we have the most important person. This is somebody who's in the hierarchy. It's a woman, you can see from her dress, and she is the tallest. Because she is the tallest, she's the biggest, it's something we find in these early civilizations that denotes importance. Now, that's not so hard to imagine, because even now, things that are bigger call more of attention to us, and we think of them as more important. And so there's a particular word that we use in art history that denotes this. It's called hierarchical scale. In other words, hierarchy is a word that denotes the importance of individuals from the lower to the higher, right? Think of military, the general is the up top, and then your average soldier is on bottom. And so that hierarchy is important. In this case, the fact that she is an important individual, a god, a goddess, or maybe a queen, that power and that importance is denoted by how tall she is. And again, that term is called hierarchical scale. And we'll see that over and over through the Egyptians, well up through the Greek and Roman times. And the last Sumerian work that we're going to be looking at is one of my personal favorites. It's called The Great Lyre with Bull Heads. Now, this is not lying like somebody who lies, but this is lyre in a musical instrument. It's much like a modern day harp. And we're not so much interested in the harp, the mechanics of this musical instrument, but we're interested in a small relief panel, or this little series of registers that can be found underneath the bull's head. If you can see here on this slide, you see the harp, the lyre on the far left, the detail of the bull heads, and then on the far right we have the register of these animal creatures that we're going to be focusing on. And if you delve in closer, what you see is yet again the use of hierarchical scale. So on the bottom register, it's small. As you move up, the one on top is the largest. And in that scene is some mythological creature right in the center. And indeed, all of these figures in these registers are actual animals that are taking on human qualities. You can see pretty clearly in the second register from the bottom, what looks like a kangaroo playing the harp, looks like a bear playing some kind of string bass, if you will. You see on the third one a series of animals bringing wine and food, up to presumably the god or mythological figure on the top register. So you may be thinking, well, this is kind of primitive, using animals and making them do human things, that we would never do that in this modern era. But actually, we do it quite often. If you think of animation, let's say Kung Fu Panda or Ratatouille, you indeed find animals, right, doing very human things. We're drawn to it. And especially in Ratatouille, a rat who cooks seems like polar opposites, right? You would not want a rat cooking your food, but it somehow works. We're drawn to these types of things. And that indeed can be found in the earliest of works of art back in the Sumerian time. So not much has changed, right? And even in the primitive time, we saw this combination of animal and human with the cave painting of the bird-headed man. Then we had the lion-headed man. And now in Sumerian, we have these images that are depicting various animals doing human things.